wife's revenge for her husband rudely calling her a sandwich maker, for example. When he bit into his sandwich at work the next day, he noticed his sandwich maker had left the wrapping on the cheese. And when he opened up the sandwich to remove the plastic, he saw the words, "Not sorry," written in Sharpie. But husbands get petty too. This particular husband left for work annoyed with his wife one morning and took his revenge in a truly diabolical fashion by only making his half of the bed. Another form of harmless passive aggression was served up by an annoyed customer whose order was wrong. The complaint doesn't get much clearer than, "I said no onion," on the plate, written in the problematic ingredient itself. For too long, inconsiderate people had let their dogs poop on lawns and walked away without facing the consequences. Thankfully, Redditor Big Palmer figured out how to put a stop to this. After a fan of poopers struck time and time again, he set up a camera to catch any owners and their four-legged friends in the act. He was successful and he printed out stills from the CCTV, placing one on a stake right next to the pile of poop for the whole neighborhood to see. Do you have any of your own brilliant tales of passive-aggressive revenge? I'd love to hear them in the comment section below, or you can email me via the email in the description. They may even be featured in a future video. Thanks for watching.
Nothing says spring like a brand new family. Get big savings on all of our new family members at the Hyundai Spring Sales Event going on now.
Get 0% APR on the Tucson or Santa Fe, or up to $2,500 in total savings. Hurry in today.
Con la suerte de que un señor o una señora.
Bienvenidos a mi Santa Maria.
For me, music is like a challenge you get to do every day. You can pass levels and then there's another level. It doesn't end. And focusing in one goal and then achieving it and then going to the next goal and looking back and see what you achieved. It is a great feeling. I never get tired of practicing, so I don't want to be the typical bass player. I want to take bass to the next level. One key point, if you want to get better and better, is to trust your instrument. Because only if your instrument is not in your way, you can become the best version of yourself. There's a point when you're practicing that you just stop thinking about the fingers and how hard it is to play the instrument. You start flowing. I like the feeling you get when you're in shape with music, so I like to practice every day just to feel that I'm in shape, that I pick the instrument and it feels comfortable to me since the first second.
Yo a Miki lo veo un músico completo, o sea, un músico que no solo es un bajista, sino...
Sometimes it seems like luck just isn't on our side. But when the unthinkable happens, you'd be amazed to discover just how fortunate some people can be. From nauseating free falls to freak weather accidents, here are some of the luckiest people who survived the impossible. Number 10. Natalia Pasternak. One summer's afternoon in June 2015, 55-year-old Natalia Pasternak and her 80-year-old friend Valentina Gorodetskaya were walking through the Siberian forest collecting birch saps, unaware that this was a trip they might never have returned from. The pair had unknowingly crossed into the path of a huge brown bear, which made an initial beeline for Valentina's dog, before turning its attention to the mother of two, Natalia. After attempting to separate the wild animal from her friend by hitting it with a stick, Valentina ran to find help, leaving Natalia to face the jaws of death. During the hour-long ordeal, the bear assumed that its now-mauled prey was finally dead and began burying Natalia with earth and leaves in order to eat her later. Eventually, police arrived on the scene and noticed that the part-exposed woman was still breathing, and with no other options, they shot the bear and unearthed Natalia, who later fully recovered in hospital. Despite being buried alive and intended as a brown bear's next meal, Natalia Pasternak lived to tell the terrifying tale, and even posted an update on her social media with the caption, "Life is beautiful." Number 9. Phineas Gage. The case of Phineas Gage is quite literally mind-blowing. On September 13, 1848, then 25-year-old Gage was working as the foreman of a crew preparing a railroad near Cavendish, Vermont, when disaster struck. He was using an iron tamping rod to pack explosive powder into a hole when the powder suddenly detonated, sending long, 1.25-inch diameter rod hurtling upward. The rod penetrated Gage's left cheek, tearing through his brain and exiting through the back of his skull, where it landed 80 feet away. Remarkably, Gage was able to walk to a nearby cart to alert a coworker who rushed him to a doctor, where the physician was astonished to find his patient conscious and able to communicate. Despite losing sight in his left eye, Gage was able to leave his house within a month and could even recount exactly when and how the accident happened. But it wasn't long until those closest to him noticed something wrong. His well-mannered disposition had been replaced by an unheard-of aggression and lack of social decorum, and family and friends claimed he was no longer himself. Studies carried out in 2012 concluded that the injury had destroyed around 11% of white matter in Gage's frontal lobe and 4% of his cerebral cortex, causing irreversible damage to his rational processing. To this day, Gage is remembered as one of the most famous patients in neuroscience. Number 8. Casey Wagner. They say lightning never strikes twice, but one man learned the hard way that famous phrases shouldn't always be taken as fact. In October 2013, 31-year-old Casey Wagner was attending an annual off-road event in St. Joe, Texas called Rednecks with Paychecks when storm clouds began rolling in above. While waiting for a friend to return from the toilet, Wagner sought shelter under a tree. A mistake which would cost him dearly. By the time he noticed electrical sparks splintering off the tree trunk, it was already too late. Casey was suddenly struck by lightning, and before he could hit the ground, a second bolt struck his work boot, sending electricity shooting up through his body. Luckily, a passing nurse rushed to his aid and kept him conscious while they waited for paramedics to arrive at the scene. Astonishingly, after just one night in observation, Casey was released with no major injuries, and doctors claimed he was a living miracle. The chances of being struck by lightning in the U.S. are around 1 in 750,000, so Casey Wagner was incredibly lucky to survive a double strike. One thing is for sure though, he won't be standing under any more trees during bad weather. Number 7. Sambora. In August 2018, one man beat all odds by surviving 4 days in the Cambodian jungle with no food, water, or means of escape. Oh, and did I mention he was wedged between two giant rocks? 28-year-old Sambora had been scouring the Chakri mountain jungle in the northwestern province of Baden-Württemberg in search of bat droppings or guano to sell as valuable fertilizer when his torch fell into a small rocky hollow. Bending down to retrieve it, Boris slipped and fell into the narrow crevice between the rocky terrain below, where he became wedged in the rock face for 4 agonizing days. Eventually, his worried brother discovered him and alerted the authorities, who took this unbelievable photo from above before beginning a painstaking operation to free the man. It took 200 rescuers around 10 hours to cut away the parts of the rock which had trapped him, before he was taken to a provincial hospital to recover. The Cambodian police chief has since declared Chakrai Mountain prohibited for climbing, and despite being dangerously weak shortly after the ordeal, Sambora has thankfully returned to full health, making him one impossibly lucky man. Number 6. Christine McKenzie. Skydiving is a thrill for some, but for many others, the idea of falling through the sky is a total nightmare, even when there's a parachute involved. When then 23-year-old Christine McKenzie prepared for her 112th skydive in August 2004, she had no idea that it would be any different from her other successful attempts. As a seasoned skydiver, McKenzie was unfazed as she began her 11,000-foot descent until it was time to prepare for landing and her parachute failed to open. Trying not to panic, she pulled on the cord of her emergency chute. The lines got tangled and she hurtled towards the ground in a 45-second freefall before smashing into a set of power cables. By absorbing most of the energy from her fall, the power lines had saved Mackenzie's life, and when she was admitted to hospital, she suffered only a broken pelvis. Skydiving instructor Vanna Gulliver was astounded to find her alive and claimed that a reserve parachute malfunction is basically unheard of. Despite her ordeal, Mackenzie even announced from her hospital bed she was determined to jump again. Number 5. Greg Rasmussen. Greg Rasmussen is an animal conservationist who came a little too close for comfort with some of the fiercest predators in the African bush back in 2003. Rasmussen had boarded his single-engine plane over Hawaii National Park in Zimbabwe in search of endangered rhinos when he lost control during intense winds and crashed into the plains below. After quickly realizing that he'd broken both legs, Rasmussen was able to drag himself to a nearby tree to seek shelter, but his nightmare was far from over. The impact had detuned his radio, so any mayday calls went unheard, and he soon realized he would have to wait it out in the wilderness. Vulnerable and exposed, Rasmussen became an easy and appealing meal for nearby predators, and as vultures began to circle, a stampede of elephants headed towards the wreckage. Thinking fast, Rasmussen beat the aluminum hull of his aircraft with a stick, which scared them off, and he repeated the same trick after identifying the chilling call of a lioness as dusk set in. After surviving the night and fending off a hungry hyena with his drumming, Rasmussen was found and rescued. And after some 100 operations, some use in his legs was restored, and he is now 3 inches shorter. Number 4. Truman Duncan. Becoming known as the Miracle Man is no easy feat, but 40-year-old Truman Duncan definitely deserves such a title after surviving being cut clean in half. In June 2006, Truman was working at Greenbrier Rail Service in Claiborne, Texas, when he fell between a pair of moving railroad freight cars and found himself fighting for his life. After hanging onto the car for 20 seconds, Truman was caught beneath the wheel supporting 20,000 pounds of dead weight, which dragged him along for 50 feet before severing him through the pelvis bone. Miraculously, Truman stayed conscious and even contacted 911 before waiting 45 minutes for paramedics to locate him at the huge rail yard. Blood loss has sent his body into crucial preservation mode, and his vital organs like his heart, lungs, liver, and 1 kidney remained intact. After 23 surgeries over 4 months, Truman, who now uses a wheelchair, was fully active again, and he has even returned to work in the office at the very same rail yard. Number 3. Anna Bagenholm. In 1999, Swedish orthopedic surgeon Anna Bagenholm made medical history when she was shockingly revived after freezing to death some 24 hours earlier. Then 29-year-old Bagenholm had been skiing with colleagues in the Kjolland mountain range in Norway when she lost control during a steep descent and fell onto a frozen stream below. A hole then opened up beneath her body, swallowing her head first and trapping her under 8 inches of ice with no means of escape. And when her friends found her and attempted to pull her out, only her feet and skis were above the ice. After 40 minutes of shallow breathing using a tiny air pocket, Anna's body temperature reached a staggeringly low 13.70 degrees Celsius, and she entered circulatory arrest. By the time rescuers dug her out, she had been under the freezing ice for 80 minutes, and when she was airlifted to hospital, she had undoubtedly been clinically dead for 2 hours. After desperate efforts to rewarm her blood, Anna's heart miraculously restarted 24 hours after her initial fall. And after more than a year, she was able to move again. Doctors believe that the extreme cold slowed her metabolism, causing the brain to require less oxygen, and induced hypothermia is now practiced with critical patients to prolong the window needed to save lives. Number 2. Ron Hunt. It may seem unlikely that the subject of an x-ray like this one could make it out alive, but one incredibly lucky man has lived to tell the tale. On 15th August 2003, construction worker Rod Hunt was working in the Tahoe Donner subdivision in Truckee, California, when one mishap almost cost him his life. Hunt was drilling above his head while standing on a 6-foot ladder when he pushed a little too hard, trying to bore a hole, causing the ladder to wobble. Realizing what was about to happen, Hunt followed standard safety procedure by tossing the drill aside, but the power tool didn't fall far enough away, and he landed face first on the 18-inch long, 1.5-inch diameter drill bit. The tool skewered his head by entering his right eye and exiting about 6 inches through the side of his skull, but it miraculously pushed his brain aside, sparing him from brain damage, paralysis, and probable death. Specialists initially planned to cut the drill bit out, but decided to effectively unscrew it free, and Hunt recovered from his injuries in just under a month. Despite losing an eye and suffering a fractured skull, Hunt emerged relatively unscathed, and his cognitive health has proved even more remarkable than the curious case of Phineas Gage. Before I continue,